consistent. Impeachment is dominating the discussion in Washington, and even though it hasn't been the biggest topic among primary voters, one Republican challenger just dropped out of the race, citing, quote, too much noise and partisan division from the process. That leaves two high-profile challengers left, including the original, former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who joins us today. Governor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Likewise. So Mark Sanford, probably one of the candidates you had to watch out for the most, other than the president, in this Republican primary, gets out of the race saying there's just not enough oxygen left in the room on the Republican side due to impeachment. You disagree. Why is that?
Well, I would hope that the impeachment proceedings, as they roll on and move from the House to the Senate, would put some oxygen into the room, unless we're all going to totally ignore it. Having said that, I will say that it's not the thing that voters most want to talk about these days. They'd rather talk about almost anything else than Donald Trump. I mean, they'll give you the thumbs down sign or, finger in the mouth sign, but they don't want to talk about it. The whole country is kind of exhausted. And my hope, though, as a veteran litigator and someone who's handled a lot of long lead time investigations, is that over time, the investigation is going to produce hard facts, incontrovertible facts that Mr. Trump and his defenders won't be able to do anything with because they'll be demonstrated beyond any possibility of dispute. That's what happens in litigation. That's what happens in jury trials. And this is one great big gargantuan jury trial.
With a lot of politics laid over the top of it.
That's right.
A lot of your fellow Republicans think Democrats are overreaching. Do you think they're doing that at all, going too far here?
No, that's that's almost ludicrous. As you know from our past meetings, I worked on the Nixon impeachment, so I read all the records about when they were putting in the impeachment and removal clause. It was not an accident. They had to show the president could be removed, or they never would have gotten the Constitution ratified in the colonies, who were very suspicious of executives and monarchs in particular. And the two things they were most scared of were foreign interference in the colonies' affairs, or United States affairs, and corruption of office, by which they meant, and I mean, abuse of the president's office to further his own interests, whether they're financial or political or whatever kind of interest. Anything of value, that's bribery and extortion. The same facts make out both bribery and extortion. And leveraging the $400 million in aid over the head of this newly elected president to make him do something that would help Trump in the election, at the same time that Trump is trying to cancel the first-in-the-nation primary in New Hampshire and shut down primaries around the country so that there's no contest if he can do it. It just shows you that his impulses are to try to establish himself as a monarch.
You would contend that if you're a constitutional originalist, this is a classic case that requires impeachment and conviction.
You don't have to be an originalist or not an originalist. You can read the plain language of the Constitution, and it's there. This is so far beyond anything that Richard Nixon ever did. He had one conversation where he said, tell them it's national security, tell them it's CIA, tell them they should squash this Watergate investigation. Here you have the president on top of the table ordering his own director of national intelligence to commit perjury to hide what the president did. And, Senator Coates said, well, I can't do that. That would be a lie. That would be perjury. And the president says to him and the other three people he had similar conversations with, what's your point? What's your point? It would be a lie. What's your point? It would be perjury. So he so much takes it to heart as a given that everyone's job is to protect his political skirts at any cost. And that's not how the law is supposed to work, and that's not how the Constitution works. And the president, I'm so sorry to say this, but he's unclear as to the concept of what the position of the president of the United States is in our scheme of constitutional government. And that's the classic textbook case for getting him out of there.
If somehow Republicans do vote to impeach and convict, does your primary challenge to then President Pence continue?
Well, I'm not sure there would be time for President Pence to get on the ballot because he would become acting president. But by the time of Super Tuesday, say early March, a lot of deadlines would have passed. It seems to me that our campaign is writing a check for $25,000 to get on some ballot like every other day. And once those deadlines have passed, you can't get in. There would be no time for a Ted Cruz to get in, or a Marco Rubio, and the fact that Mr. Pence was acting president wouldn't put him on any ballots either. You know how many Republican candidates there would be left standing?
Just you.
You're looking at them.
Well, hey, I mean, I guess that's within the realm of possibility, but it seems like a long shot for those Republican senators to go that far. We were talking about constitutional originalism. One of the reasons conservatives stick with Donald Trump is his judicial appointments. They really appreciate what he's been able to do there on the federal bench. If you are president, are you nominating similar justices with similar views of the Constitution to the federal bench?
Well, I thought the two Supreme Court justices were pretty good. And Kavanaugh, although it got all caught up in that maelstrom at the end, with the doctor giving her very powerful testimony, he did have a good record in the D.C. circuit. And actually, he was pretty good about promoting women and watching out for women's interests there, too. Gorsuch, I thought, was excellent. I read all 26 finalists, read up on all 26 finalists in that nomination, and I thought he was the best before Trump even nominated him. So no quarrel there. But one thing I would not do is commit myself in advance to appoint only people recommended by the Federalist Society. I want to look for the smartest person I can find in the whole person and consider their entire life, because I want a person, a broad gauge person, a person with some depth on the Supreme Court of the United States.
What do you think about an idea that some Democrats are getting behind of Supreme Court reform? Perhaps instituting non-life terms, essentially term limits on the Supreme Court, and even expanding the number of justices.
Those are both terrible ideas. You know, court packing, FDR tried that, and that failed for want of a second. And we have life tenure for judges in Massachusetts. It really does give them greater independence. And you don't want judges to be subject to political currents back and forth. So that's a particularly bad idea.
One of your big issues is deficit and the debt in terms of budget and spending. Can you identify some specific cuts that you'd be making as president?
Well, I would probably zero out entire bureaucracies. You know, I don't start from the premise that the budget item is going to be last year's appropriation plus 5% or 10%, as they do in D.C. Anything less than a 10% increase in Washington is called a cut. And you got to go, you know, account by account, and if there's a big bureaucracy there that doesn't seem to be achieving anything, you just zero it out. It's called zero-based budgeting, and that's what we did in Massachusetts to not only balance the budget, but get rated the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States as a Republican in Massachusetts.
One area of spending where New Hampshire arguably needs more help is in the opioid crisis. We know that treatment takes money. Do you have any ideas, though, from your libertarian days, perhaps, in terms of attacking the opioid crisis from a cultural standpoint? Because that's part of the crisis, too. It's not just something the government can fix. What would you do beyond government to try and help?
Yeah, no, I've been heard to say recently quite a lot that all forms of addiction, opioids, alcohol, tobacco, other narcotics, it should all be treated as one great big healthcare emergency in this country, and treated as such, not as a candidate for, you know, a high priority on the criminal justice enforcement list. On opioids, I thought, frankly, what Governor Charlie Baker did in Massachusetts, getting everybody in the room cracking heads, saying, doctors, you can't overprescribe, you have to agree to protocols before you do this, pharmacists, you got to do that, big pharma, you got to do the other. Nobody was happy. That meant it was a pretty good resolution. That could be a national model. And again, the states, as I learned in my experience, can be laboratories of democracy for the federal government.
You're an author. In your younger years, you may have read some James Fenimore Cooper, a book called Last of the Mohicans. When the historians look back at this race, are they going to say this is the last stand of the Yankee Republicans, the last of his tribe?
It's not just that I'm a Yankee. It's that I'm, you know, fiscally conservative. I'm an economic conservative, but I believe in other traditions of the Republican Party that I think are conservative, like worrying about the environment, concern about the environment, clean air, clean water, climate change. You know, the root of that conservation idea is conserve, and that's what Republicans always used to be about, and I'm proud to be in the tradition of Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln in that regard.
All right, Governor Weld, thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
We'll see you out there on the trail.